Well, hi! I feel like this is still playing, but it's not. Oh, hey! Terror, thanks for being here. So I am gonna have to go. I'm doing some laundry right now, so I apologize. I'll have to go check on it in a little bit. And hello, Tori, I know you're listening while you're driving, so please be safe and don't chat and drive. So this is the last, we're finishing up the last part of this book, Enola Holmes Mystery, The Case of the Peculiar Pink Fan by Nancy Springer. So, I'm just going to get on cracking. We're on the 13th chapter, and there are, I think, 18 chapters and an epilogue, so we're going to go ahead and crack on through. I'm probably going to go check on my laundry after the first chapter, so I apologize if the delay, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to take a sip of water first, though. My throat feels kind of scratchy, because I just had lunch. So, alrighty. Without further ado, we'll just get on started with Holland in the Afternoon. There you go. You heard it here first. Chapter the 13th. I will spare the gentle reader a full account of the remainder of that night. Suffice it to say that after watching my brother drive away in his cab, I was rent by the most unexpected and vehement sentimental eruption, a kind of Vesuvius of the emotions that took me quite by surprise. Intermittently, on my journey back to the East End, I sobbed. Once I had reached my bed, I nearly fell insensible into an exhausted slumber. And in the morning, when I awoke, I found myself weeping anew, unfit to be seen at breakfast. Lacking reason to dress, I remained in my nightgown. Indeed, it was only a sudden irrational terror. What if my brother has tracked me here? That enabled me to leave my bed. Levitated by panic, I peered, trembling, between the window sash and the blind. There was no sign of Sherlock, of course, to my most exceedingly contradictory disappointment. Indeed, all of my sensibilities seemed at odds with one another, thoughts running like a frightened quail in all directions. I had failed. I could do nothing now to save the hapless Lady Cecily, nor could Sherlock, with a hurt foot. I hoped it was not actually broken. I wondered whether he had gone to see Dr. Watson about it. I wondered why he had not invited his good friend Watson to accompany him to the ha-ha. I wondered where those Merganser villains were keeping their victim. I wondered where my mother might be roaming, whether she might be in any danger. Don't think of Mum. I wondered whether Sherlock had gone yet to talk with Mycroft. Confound Mycroft, he would tell Sherlock the exact location of a public place. I must not go near the lady's lavatory again, or wear a scholar's dark dress, as Mycroft had seen me in it. My alternatives in regard to disguise dwindled each time I was sighted by one of my brothers. Sherlock had seen the tweed suit. I must get rid of it. Mum had left behind a tweed suit when she had run away. Why ever on earth did I keep thinking of my mother? Lacking Mum, I wished Sherlock were the one who had legal guardianship of me instead of Mycroft. I sensed in Sherlock a certain sympathy. No, I must trust neither of them. How much had Sherlock learned of me the night before? Far too much. How could I have been such an idiot to let him so near me for so long? Sherlock now knew that I kept numerous useful items bestowed upon my personage. Had he seen where I had kept them? Had he noticed in the dark my womanly figure? Did he know about my bust enhancer, my dress improver, my hip regulators? Must I start all over again as heaven knew what? Perhaps a gypsy fortune-teller, in order to elude him? Yet I so wished to encounter him again. I imagined chatting with him as we walked side by side along some cobbled London street. So many things I wished I had asked him the night before. What did he hear from Ferndale, the ancestral hall where both of us had been raised? How were Lane, the butler, and Mrs. Lane, the cook, and their lackwit son Dick, and the somewhat more intelligent dog Reginald? What news of Kindford village? And here in London, how were Dr. and Mrs. Watson, and how was Mrs. Hudson, Sherlock's landlady, whom I had met the day I took the cipher-book away? And speaking of the cipher-book, when you went to Ferndale, my dear brother Sherlock, to investigate, what did you find? What did Mum hide from me behind the mirror? In that moment my heart clenched. All my fluttering quail flew away, so to speak, and the volcanic tumult in my mind focused itself with fierce, nearly insane energy upon one question. Had Mum left any sort of message for me? A question utterly without any practical merit. Yet somehow, at that time of turmoil, it seemed supremely important, because I understood finally why I had not yet attempted to locate Mum, why I hesitated to see her. What sort of daughter I was. The frightened sort, actually. I felt not at all sure, you see. I knew Mum cared for me in her way, but whether she would want to see me. Don't be a coward, Enola, say it. Or if you can't say it, think it. I did not know whether I was a fool to think Mum loved me. But if she had left me some message in the mirror, that question took over the day like so much molten lava, flooding my mind and burying any ordinary mental commerce deeper into the marketplace of Pompeii. The need I had so long postponed would be put off no longer. That morning, without some word from my mother, my life seemed not worth living. My mother, you see, 10 months ago, when she had departed so unexpectedly on my 14th birthday, had left behind for me a little handmade booklet of ciphers, which, when solved, had led me to considerable sums of money hidden in her brass bedposts, behind her watercolors, etc., money that had enabled me to escape boarding school by running away in my turn. Most unfortunately, I had lost my cipher book to a cutthroat, and it had then made its way into Sherlock's hands. I had regained it by stealing it from his lodging, only to discover, by the pencil marks that he made upon the pages, that he had solved the one cipher I could not, a cipher on a page decorated with the pansies. Here's the cipher. Make sure you can see it. There we go, now it's focused. Pansies look like little faces. Perhaps that is why they symbolize thoughts. Mum had affectionately called them Johnny Jump-Ups, but to me they seemed like elfin ladies with their hair piled, 2 dark petals on top, and on the 3 lighter petals below, their ancient wizened features. If I had thought more about pansies and less about finding something, when I saw the cipher I might have guessed how Mum had encoded her message. Once one has placed the 3 lines in order beneath one another, it's easy to see how Mum had arranged her letters like a pansy's 5 petals, and then reading each pansy individually, it is simple to decipher. Heart's ease be yours, Enola, see in my mirror. Mum had secreted something inside a hand mirror, or perhaps behind a wall mirror's brown paper backing. Heart's ease be yours, Enola. Mum's true wish for me, or merest wordplay? Heart's ease is another's name for pansies. Or had Mum chosen pansies for a purpose? Might this cipher, had I solved it, have led me to the one thing I most wanted from her, and the one thing I most lacked? Some message of explanation, farewell, even, dare I say, affection? I would delay no longer. I would find out. Instantly, the moment I resolved to act, my tears ceased along with my trembling, and my barefoot pacing of my bedroom. Still in my nightgown, but all galvanized by purpose now, I seized upon my laptop writing desk, thrusting aside papers I had left upon it previously, and sat down to communicate with Mum via the personal column of the Pall Mall Gazette. I scrawled, Mum, I never found what you left in the mirror. Please tell me, what was it? Quite a long message to attempt to encode. Moreover, Sherlock and Mycroft, whom I quite wished not to know of this business, could decipher any code, I knew, as easily as Mum could. Any code except this one. My chrysanthemum, the first letter of fidelity, the third or fourth of thoughts of absent friends, the second of fascination, the second of fidelity again, the second of fascination again, the first of remembrance. In the language of flowers, you see, fidelity is ivy, the first letter I. Thoughts of absent friends indicate zinnias, the third or fourth letter of which is N. Fascination is ferns, second letter E, and so on to rosemary for remembrance. Thus far I had encoded I never. Egad, this simply would not do, being far too lengthy, cumbersome, and even though I tried to use only flowers whose meanings were quite immutable, still prone to error. After crumpling this effort and throwing it aside, I sat frowning until I remembered how Mum had most recently communicated with me, in plain English with a veiled meaning. After thinking about this for a while, I smiled and tried again. Narcissus bloomed in water, for he had none. Chrysanthemum in glass, for she had one. All of ivy's tendrils failed to find. What was the iris planted behind? There! A sort of riddle. Merest nonsense about flowers. Narcissus was a flower, but before the gods had turned him into one, he was a Greek youth who had fallen in love with his own beauty, when he saw his reflection in a pool of water. He did not have a mirror, but Chrysanthemum, or Mum, my mother, bloomed in glass, a looking-glass. Ivy was of course me. I had failed to find the iris, another flower named from Greek mythology, Iris being the goddess who brought messages from Olympus to earth via the bridge of the rainbow. It was a message then that Mum had planted for me, presumably behind the glass. Much relieved, I inked copies of my riddle rhyme for the Pall Mall Gazette and a few more of Mum's favorite periodicals. Since I was not yet washed, fed, or dressed, I would send these via the midday post, which would get them to Fleet Street before I could. All I needed was a few postage stamps. Searching for these, impatiently I cast aside the papers I had already cast aside earlier, until something I had written caught my eye. A list, compiled. Heavens, was it only yesterday? It seemed like a week ago. Her chaperones, proud and richly clothed, seemed to be of noble blood. The chaperones seemed to wield familial authority over her. They dressed her in greenish yellow. Might they be of aesthetic taste? Cecily and her entourage took a cab number blank. She most likely got the fan attending a pink tea, the Viscountess of Inglethorpe's pink tea. For a moment, reading this, I stood like a pillar of salt in the middle of my room. Then, blast and confound, I cried, flinging up my hands in despair of myself. I am a dolt. How had I let a whole morning slip away while I dithered about bygones? I needed to get to work at once. I knew now who might be able to tell me where Lady Cecily was imprisoned. That's the end of the chapter. Catch up on your chat, Terror. A sudden irrational me is a good reason to abandon one's bed. That's very, very true. It's a fun birthday present. A gone mother. Yep. What if a green bug flying from type Generation 1 of Pokemon had his or her own secret code? We'd have a Scyther cipher. This is true. This is so true. Thank you. Thank you for clapping. Appreciate it. I'm going to go check on the laundry real quick, and then I will be right back. So, please sit tight for a minute. I will be back very shortly. I'm going to put this screen up so that you're not looking at my bedroom. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Back. Alrighty. So, go ahead and keep on keeping on. I think this book, yeah, it does. This book has one of these cards in it. You guys remember this? And it'll tell you your due date. Good old libraries. Thanks for the welcome back. Chapter the 14th. I needed to be exceedingly careful, that is to say, most thoroughly disguised, for I needed to venture where I knew I should not, where I risked being recognized. And what if, after all, I could not find... No what ifs, Enola, just get dressed. Easier said than done. The role I needed to take was that of lady, requiring a handkerchief, linen camisole, and drawers to protect me from my own corset, then the corset itself, not straight-laced, of course, but necessary to support the various improvers, regulators, and enhancers that would carry my supplies whilst providing me with the requisite hourglass figure. Then a soft cover over the corset's hard corded cotton and steel, then several silk petticoats, plus the dress itself, a semi-bustled and pleated lapis blue promenade dress with jacket suitable for shopping, and its matching hat, embroidered handkerchief, gloves, gaiters, and parasol. Perhaps 15 pounds of clothing, not counting my best boots. But that was not all. In addition to being a lady, today I needed to be beautiful, as this was the guise in which I was least likely to be recognized as Enola. So I had to take my own hair, which, like the rest of me, most unfortunately attests kinship with my brother Sherlock, being of the same dull and indeterminate tree-trunk hue as his. I had to yank my hair to the top of my head and pin it there, then hide it under my ever-so-luxuriant chestnut wig, to the coif of which I had incorporated and fastened my hat. Also I put a fringe of curls across my forehead. Des ring... I'm sure it's, French. Des ringure? Maybe? Rigure? I don't know. I can't read French. As Princess Alexandra wore them, and I applied various disreputable substances to my lips, cheeks, eyelids, and eyelashes as subtly as I could. After much practice, and perhaps because the blood of the Vernet runs in my veins, I am able, I think, and hope, to paint my face in such a way that my art is taken for nature's own. Then, and only then, was I ready. Mid-afternoon, and still I had not eaten, but there was no time to do so, for my best chance, not a very good chance at all, considering that there were approximately 20,000 cabs in London, confound my, dolichocephalic head, that I could not remember the identifying number of one cab I had sought. Still, cab drivers waited for their fares at the same cab stands day after day, so I would begin my search in the same place an hour I had formerly seen him. One person who might know where Lady Cecily was, the cabby who had conveyed her shopping for her trousseau, and then presumably home. I would look for him outside the Oxford Street ladies' lavatory, which was, most unfortunately, the same place where my brother Mycroft was likely to be looking for me. Perambulate, I reminded myself as I descended from my own conveyance. Mince along with itty-bitty birdie steps. Twirl your parasol. You're a beautiful lady all dressed up to go shopping. Off I sailed, thus graciously, like a heavenly blue ship amid London's sooty maelstrom. Soldiers, scullery maids, clerks and clerics, a blind beggar, led by a barefoot child, a one-armed greybeard with his victorious cross prominently displayed, a fuzzy-haired slum woman selling corn plasters, gentlemen tipping their top hats, paper boys dotted red with skin eruptions, a ragged little girl hoarse from selling apples, an inky scholar with shoulders narrow, slopped, and lopsided from carrying books. Such was the grimy, motley crowd through which I strolled as if through a meadow of dark daisies. At a genteel gate I approached the cab stand, scanning its ranks while appearing, I hoped, only to gaze about me with idle superiority. I had no idea how I was going to find the cab I wanted, for I had not seen the driver's face, and I had no clear memory of the vehicle itself. They all looked so much the same. On the way hither I had taken pencil and paper in hand, attempting a sketch, but had produced only a blur except for the horse, which came out rather nice. I adore horses. So there I sat like a child drawing a picture of Black Beauty. Really, Enola. Disappointed in myself, I thought that perhaps when I arrived on the spot I might recognize the cab if it were there. Too many perhaps, mights, and ifs. Too many perhapses, mights, and ifs. I saw nothing at all familiar among the ranks of cabs. On a nearby pavement, however, directly in my path stood a pair of figures all too familiar to me, my brothers, Mycroft and Sherlock. I am ashamed to say that the sight of them sent my mental faculties along with my heartbeat into temporary abeyance. I halted. But then, as often happens at such moments, my mother's voice chided me from within my own mind. Nonsense, Enola. You will do very well on your own. The oft-spoken, well-remembered words starched my spine. Collecting my wits, I started walking again. Luckily, engrossed in what appeared to be a most animated conversation, Sherlock and Mycroft had not yet observed me. They stood approximately at the pace where I had previously encountered, and booted Mycroft. Dressed much as he had been that day, that robust gentleman appeared unharmed by the experience. Sherlock, however, while impeccable in his black broadcloth city suit, wore upon his right foot a carpet slipper, and leaned heavily upon a cane. Carefully in control of my pace and bearing, I sidled along, head up, hat fetchingly cocked, parasol aloft, making sure that I stood out like a blue beacon among the throng. A beautiful lady who wants the whole world to give her its covert glance, so as not to be seen. How ironic, to conceal oneself by being looked at. But there it was. My brothers had no interest in women. Observing a paragon of fashionable feminine pulchritude approaching, they would give her not a second glance. And so it proved. As I passed them, like automatons, they touched their hat brims without pausing in their conversation. Cannot be allowed to go on, Mycroft was saying in his usual pompous manner. You were much remiss, Sherlock, to let her go blithely on her errant way. I beg to differ. She seemed far from blithe. Indeed. My distress had showed, apparently, although what point Sherlock was trying to make I know not, for I heard no more, continuing on my errant way. And disciplining my mind to focus on the task at hand, trying to find the cab in which Lady Cecily had disappeared. But I still did not recognize anything familiar in the ranks before me. Nearly at the end of the cab stand and out of sight of my brothers, I halted, took a deep breath, and turned to survey the scene one more time, without any pleasant result except that I found the humble brown gaze of a cab horse looking back at me. A big, placid, dun horse. On impulse, for his was the most honest greeting I had received in many a day, I stepped to his head and patted his cheekbone with my silk-gloved hand. With a hastened snort of approval, he lowered his head so that I could rub his forelock. Sitting on his box, the cab driver put aside his reading material, and it appeared to be the Illustrated Crime Gazetter, and eyed me uncertainly. What a sweet horse, I remarked, finding it a pleasure to speak naturally in my own aristocratic accent. So good-tempered, and willing, is he not? That he is, milady, an hard worker and an easy keeper. Warming to the topic, the cab driver leaned towards me. The best I ever had, and a great good fortune to a independent such as me. He owned his horse and cab, he meant, rather than driving for a cab company, and while he kept his income, he also took his risks. A lame horse could ruin him. Smoothing the dun horse's black mane, I nodded. He's as sturdy as a brick, isn't he? What's his name? Why, he's a she, milady, and her name is Pet. My smile widened. Pet snorted softly and nosed my skirt as if she might locate a treat in one of my pockets. You're an uncommon good judge of horses, milady, if you don't mind me saying so, the cabby added. Most of the ladies favours the fancy equipages. Equipages, I guess. The fancy equipages with acnes. Yes, I saw one of those the other day. Eureka! Suddenly, in that relaxed and idle moment, I remembered. An overlarge four-wheeler, all smeared with polish, I said, with unfeigned enthusiastic disapproval. And the horse wasn't a hackney, but something of the sort, racy and high-headed, foaming at the bit, black, with white feet all feathered like a Clydesdale's. Aye, I know the one. Very flashy action, knees up to his nose. A lot of wasted wear and tear, if you ask me. That's Paddy Murphy and his gypsy horse. Really? Giving Pet a final pat, I walked a few steps and climbed into the man's cab, handing him a nice shiny sum of money in advance in order to forestall hesitation or questions. Do you think you could find this Murphy person and take me to him? I must speak with him. Oh, sure, and begorra. Whoa, don't know what that means. It's remembering them, I'm right enough, said the other cab driver without hesitation, even before I had fully described a frail girl in citrine-hued bell skirt and her two dowager chaperones. My driver had without so much difficulty located Paddy Murphy in a stable-yard of the Serpentine Mews, seated upon a bale of straw with a mug of ale in hand, while he offered the other cabbies a look, for a penny, at some mysterious marvel he kept in a pasteboard box. This he had put away hastily upon my arrival, standing up and tugging his cap. Now, clutching the shilling I handed him, Paddy Murphy spoke with true Irish loquacity. If only because them two old battle-axes, beg pardon, milady, the matron ladies grudged me the fare they did, and me squemming them hither and yon all the livelong afternoon. Hither and yon where, exactly? To be sure, if there's a linen draper's shop in London where we dinna go, I dinna know of it. Up one street and down the next. It was looking in the shop winders they were, walking, or one of the grand ladies walking, and the other in the cab with that poor creature. But he says Crather. Poor Crather of a girl at their beck and call. Now and again they take her inside of Mercer's or some such as I was to wait blocking traffic with the coach drivers cursing me eyes and me ancestors, begging your ladyship's pardon. And then he was to stop for a package, blocking traffic with some more, or wait for an order to be filled, and the constables roaring at me and threatening me license, and all the while I'm counting on the fare. While the other cab driver stood at my elbow as if he considered himself my escort and guardian, I listened with interest, but with increasing impatience. Well concealed, I hoped, for it is futile to attempt to hurry an Irishman in the telling of a tale, but I wanted to know, where did Cecily Alistair ultimately go? Rather give it up entirely than ever go through such a rigmarole again, Paddy Murphy was saying. But it couldn't be helped, for the poor wee colleen, she could barely walk, so it seemed, and far be it from me to judge me betters, but if it was none too kind to her, then those grand ladies was, if I do say it, who should have been noticing. But I am very glad you did notice, I told him, discreetly displaying financial proof of my approval in my gloved hand, a £1 note that would be his if he spoke unsatisfactorily. Please continue. Where did you take them ultimately? I quite wanted to know where Ladies Aquila and Ottilia were hiding Cecily. Are they staying in one of the hotels? Why, no, m'lady. I took them ladies all their packages to a place called Inglethorpe, Viscountess Ottilia's humble abode. My heart sank. The grandson too, that is, added my rosy-faced informant, but before that, the little one, the wee lassie, why, they dropped her off at a boot. A what? Aye, they were the peculiarest part of the whole peculiar business. They had me stop at a boat along the Thames, and 2 watermen in flat hats, they took the girl. A boat? I belatedly understood as I demanded. Took her where? Why, in the boot, out to the river, me lady. I didn't see any more. I wanted to stamp my foot, roll my eyes, and burst out crying. Confound and blast everything. This was the last straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. The last straw at which a seemingly proverbial drowning person might grasp, unwilling to let even the most slender of hopes drift by. Finding myself willing to pay the latter desperate roll, show me where, I demanded of the Irish cab driver, where exactly you left her. Take me there. That's the end of chapter 14. £15 of clothing, that's like 14.5 pounds more than I could carry. I know, you're telling me. Good old grimy motley crowd. Sounds like a Terror family reunion. Oh no! Crather. Do you mean creature? That's what I said, Crather. Exactly. Because that makes a lot of sense. Those accents, you know. Crazy, crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Alrighty, we're just going to keep on pressing. Chapter the 15th. Half an hour later, I stood at the foot of a squalid little pier on the Thames, my nose wrinkled against the stench, looking for Cecily Alistair? Here? It was a place even more wretched than the bleak streets where I had last found her. Down along the black water swarmed filthy beggar children, mudlarks, scavenging bits of bone, wood, or metal from the muck. Tattooed men swaggered in and out of the hulking brick buildings marked Trawlers Limited, or Siam Burma Orient Line, or launchers for hire. Steamships and tall-masted sailing ships and innumerable smaller vessels crowded the straitened river, whilst a hulking mechanism called the dredger loomed over everything, giving forth a deep roar punctuated by the curses of sailors, the shrieks of mudlarks, and the yelps of seagulls wheeling overhead. Trying to take it all in, I felt my heart sink. Still grasping at straws, I asked the half-drunken cabman beside me, "Did you actually see her being rowed away by watermen?" "Sure I did." And surely they had taken her to a houseboat or some such lodging which, unlike a hotel, could move about, changing location from day to day. Fiendishly clever, nearly impossible to discover. Nevertheless, I mumbled, "Which way did they go?" He pointed upstream. I glanced in that direction, sighed, and started to turn away, utterly defeated, but something white-flecked caught my eye. Straightening, I looked again, peering at a gaggle of brown gingham in the distance. No longer lethargic and mumbling, quite the opposite, starting like a bird dog on point, I exclaimed, "Is there an orphanage hereabouts?" He answered in the affirmative, indicating a dull green mansard roof looming perhaps a block away. Instantly, the noisiest possible seagull flock of memory, suspicion, and conjecture whirled into my head, all my thoughts yelling at once. Little girls with shorn heads following the ha-ha man. What the deuce was his name? Baron Dagobert Merganser, in his sister-in-law's mansion. Why not his own home? Perhaps because he did not want it known who he really was. But why had he been consorting with orphans at all? He seemed hardly the charitable type. And why at such a ticklish time, when he was holding his well-to-do niece captive to force her to marry his son? Arrangements have been made to use some quite secluded chapel. Oh my goodness. Did orphanages have chapels? It seemed probable that they did, but I did not know for sure, and I should have investigated the matter thoroughly, of course, for it might have been the merest coincidence that there was an orphanage near this particular pier on the Thames. Moreover, the orphans I had seen at Inglethorpe might have come from a different institution altogether. Their presence might have signified nothing, etc. Yet, as my brother would have said, it was suggestive, was it not? A chance offered itself, and there was no time for research and hesitation. The unfortunate Lady Cecily was to be forcibly wed tomorrow morning. Desperate measures were called for. 2 hours later, walking towards the Witherspoon home for waifs and strays, I tried to see something to indicate the presence of a chapel. A stained-glass window, for instance. But I observed only the upper part of an exceedingly plain 3-story stone and plaster edifice surrounded by a tall wooden fence, with its vertical planks so close set one could not even peep through the cracks. Most unattractive, that barrier, and most uncompromising. I found it easy enough at the point to look as if I were about to weep. This being exactly the effect I desired, I was got up as a waif, a rather tall waif, but a waif nonetheless. In order to present a stick-thin, indeed cavernous figure, I had put aside all my improvers, regulators, and enhancers, no small decision, as along with them I put aside my defensive armor, corset, and dagger, and most of my usual supplies. I carried with me only a few carefully selected items in my pockets. These did not include food, and there had been no time to eat. My stomach yowled with hunger, and I felt a bit faint. Well, so much the better for the impression that I needed to make. With a combination of vinegar and soap I had rendered my skin pasty and blistered, and a touch of lamp-black made my eyes appear haggard, my cheeks hollow. My own hair, allowed to tangle down my back, was quite ugly enough for any ragamuffin, especially after I had rubbed it and myself with coal ash. I wore the midden picker's exceedingly humble and dirty clothing, hanging far too large upon my bony shoulders and chest, and I had even gone so far as to tear some rips in the cloth. My feet wrapped with rags, on my head indeed was almost covering my eyes. I had placed a bowler hat, rescued from the street, well squashed by horses' feet and carriage wheels. As a pauper girl will use any such item to keep her head warm and covered, the effect was, I thought, most salubrious. As was my hesitation, anyone watching would see a waif trying to gather courage to venture into the fenced and forbidding unknown, not quite deciding to give up her starveling freedom for the sake of food, a shorn head, and domestic servitude. They could not possibly know that the vacillating waif was actually an aspiring Predatorian, not quite deciding whether she really needed to risk contacting her brother. Indeed, after pacing the area of the orphanage a while, making sure there was only one way to get in or out, I retreated. But only for a brief period of time, during which I penciled a note expressing a much greater certainty than I actually felt, as follows. Sherlock. Shortly prior to nuptial travesty, C.A. will attempt to exit Witherspoon Orphanage, 472 Huxtable Lane, with a pink fan. Meet her at gate. I leave it to you to assist her from there. E.H. With greatest trepidation, I folded this and addressed it to 221B Baker Street, for all my instincts warned me against giving my brother the slightest idea where I might be found at any particular time. Certainly he would try to trace the message back to me. No matter, for I would not remain in the same place, and any description a messenger might give of me would tell him only that I had disguised myself as a beggar. But what if on the morrow he engaged assistance, not only to rescue Lady Cecily, but to ensnare me? Yet I had no choice. For the sake of the hapless lady I must risk myself in more ways than one. I gave the message to a licensed commissionaire. Very surprised and puzzled he was to accept such illiterate communication and substantial fee from a wretch such as I appeared to be. But I knew he would deliver the note without fail. That was his duty. Then, as there was no time to hesitate any longer, I walked, or staggered rather, for beneath my ragged and filthy skirt I kept my knees bent in order to shorten my height while simulating a crippling case of rickets. I made my way back to the Witherspoon home, applied my eyes applied to my eyes a rag in which I had clutched a bit of onion in order to produce some tears, then knocked on the gate. Name? Asked an exceedingly plain matron seated at a rather inadequate desk, filling out a form for me. Oh, excuse me, one sec. Excuse me, I'll be right back, guys. Okay, sorry about that. Alrighty. So I've got to run an errand in about 15 minutes or so. Yeah, everything's good. I just have to run down the road and pick something up. So I'm going to finish this chapter and then take a break, and I'll be back afterwards. But we'll just keep on going. Alright. Name? Asked an exceedingly plain matron seated at a rather inadequate desk, filling out a form for me. Peggy, Mum. Standing before her, I had to remember to keep my knees bent. The effort caused me to sway a bit. So much the better. Surname? Just Peggy, Mum. Parents? Not what I ever heard of, Mum. in the broadest Cockney accent I could manage with a sniffle. Too tall seemed quite pathetic otherwise. I had decided to be lachrymose and simple. With a sigh, the woman marked a box. Illegitimate. But she tried once more. Date and place of birth? I don't rightly know, mum. Baptism? What's that, mum? Have you been baptized? How would I know, mum? Tears in my tone, and my stomach also audibly lamented. The matron looked at me, then lifted a little Chinese bell from her desk and tinkled it. The shape of the bell, sans handle, was the same as the shape of her monumental white cotton cap. At the summons of the bell, a little girl came in who looked exactly the same as all the other little girls in the place. Unsmiling, stare, cropped hair, brown gingham pinafore over an even uglier brown frock. Yes, matron? Bring bread and tea, child. Yes, matron. The girl bobbed and departed. Sit down, Peggy, said the matron kindly to me. Have you ever been incarcerated? What's that, mum? Have you ever been put in prison for any crime? No, mum. Have you ever been in the workhouse? And so it went. While I sat, shaking with nerves and hunger, shedding occasional tears and gobbling, quite sincerely, a great deal of plain bread and weak tea, she determined that I had little, if any, education, had not attended Sunday school, did not possess any money or any friends or relatives to pay for my care, had not received parish relief, and had not been treated for scrofula, scarlet fever, whooping cough, or smallpox. Subject to fits? No, mum. Incontinence of urine? Beg pardon, mum? She puffed her thin lips, then with visible effort made herself say, Do you wet yourself or your bed? No, mum. Very well. Ah. She cast her eye back over the papers she had just filled out. Peggy. Laying down her pen, she rang her bell again, and this time a girl of about my age came in carrying an armload of clothing, in which brown gingham predominated. You've had enough to eat for the time being. Go along with this little woman now. Have a bath, and then I will check you for, any infections or infestations, and cut your hair. The moment for which I had been waiting. Cut my hair, mum. Wide-eyed, I wobbled to my feet. But, mum, I don't want my hair cut. You must have it cut if you are to stay here, child. But, mum, do you wish to be fed, clothed, and educated? If so, you must have your hair cut in a hygienic manner, and you must be vaccinated against smallpox. You mean a needle, mum? This was an unexpected chance for me to pretend even greater terror. Every Cockney has a horror of vaccination, and I took full advantage of it. I can't stand no one putting no piston in me with no needle, mum. Oh, poison. Nonsense, it's not poison, and of course you can stand the prick of a needle. Every girl here has done so. The starch and scorn in her tone were just what I needed to help me truly cry out loud. I don't know if I can bear it, mum. Well, then you must go back out on the street. No, mum, please, I'm hungry. Then if you wish to stay, you must do as I say. Decide. As if in a frenzy of despair and vacillation, I raised my clasped hands. I can't decide. I needs to pray on it. A few minutes to pray on it, mum. Is there a chapel, mum? She eyed me suspiciously, but my unexpectedly devout request could hardly be refused, especially not in front of the little woman standing there, sullen, silent, and probably required to pray several times a day. Very well, she muttered, looking up to instruct the girl. Take her to the chapel. Eureka. Then return to your regular duties. I will check on her in a few minutes. A few minutes were all I needed. Once the indifferent waif-in-waiting had showed me to the chapel, a dim little sanctuary constructed as an L of the main building, the instant its holy doors had closed behind her retreating personage, I sprang from my pew, whisked up the pile of clothing the girl had deposited beside me, and took cover. I was hiding under the pulpit when I heard the matron come in. Child? She called. Child? And after a pause, during which most likely she consulted her papers regarding my name. Peggy, come here at once. I did not, of course. Grumbling aloud, where can the nitwit have got to? Grumbling aloud, where could the nitwit have got to? She went out again, to inquire, and as soon as she had done so, I set myself to find a better hiding place, in case I were truly searched for. It has been my observation that people playing hide and seek peer into things and under things, downward, but hardly ever upward. Also, climbing is my forte. For both of those reasons, upward I went, with no trouble at all, ascending the tall, ornately carved cabinet of a pipe organ, and slipping first my new clothing, which I had done up into a bundle for easy carrying, then my personage into its sturdy canvas top. There, cradled by that dust cover, inches from the chapel ceiling, surrounded by the organ cabinet's aspiring cornice, I lay in relative safety and complete comfort when the matron came back with a few companions for another look. I heard them, rather than saw them, poking about. I imagine she's got cold feet and gone. Toe heedle at the gate says not. He's been napping again then, for how else can she have got out? And she's not in here. She might be wandering the halls. She's none too bright. She'll go where she smells food, mark my words. We must keep guard on the kitchen, then. Well, she's certainly not in the chapel. They stood almost directly under me. We must tell everyone to be on the lookout. What a nuisance, one of them complained. And tonight of all nights, when we have so much preparation for tomorrow. My interest quite heightened, I assure you. A wedding of all things, here? It has to be, Cecily. It has to be. I've got it right. Yes. As inwardly I rejoiced, the speaker went on. What an odd... One must not ask questions, someone shushed her. The Baron has promised a great deal, not just funds, but favors of all sorts. Including, I supposed, treats, such as the visit to his house. The attic room's not yet ready, continued the complainer, and there's all the flowers to be got in. Come along, then. We're wasting time. I heard them leaving. The girl will turn up. God forgive me, I quite hope she doesn't. I recognized the voice of the matron who had evaluated me, saying, as they went out the door, She's a terribly repulsive ragamuffin. Not at all the sort of thing one would wish the Baron to encounter here. Oh, I thought, my nerves steadied by a moment of amusement. Little does she know. That's the end of chapter 15. Alrighty. Oh my gosh, Tara. Yeah, I know, I'm beginning to think her name isn't Peggy, too. Alrighty, so I'm going to stop here, because I got to run down the road and pick something up. But I will be back. I've got 2 chapters and three, 16, 17, yeah, 3 chapters and an epilogue left. So, unfortunately, this is going to be in 4 parts instead of 3, which I don't like that. It bothers me. But I will stop here, and I'll be back probably, I hope, like, no longer than, like, 30, 40 minutes. So, stay tuned if you like. I'll be back soon. We'll just call it, I'll be back in a bit. Don't go too far. Alrighty, sorry about that delay, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're gonna go ahead and just keep on going. I'm gonna pretend like that little break never happened. So, but thanks for being here. Sorry there was such a delay in the process. I don't like splitting it into 4 parts. I feel like that's too many, but sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah, exactly. What break? I don't know. I don't know anything about a break. I've been here. What have you been doing? This kind of bothers me, so let me see if I can fix this real quick. Live editing, guys. It's a little better. Alright, so, just keep on keeping on. Chapter the 16th. In my nest atop the pipe organ, I actually napped, with my belly full of bread and nothing to do but stay where I was until waifs, strays, what was the difference between a waif and a stray, I wondered, and bell-headed matrons had retired for the night. Evening prayers awoke me, indeed nearly deafened me. Even though I plugged my ears with my fingers, my entire personage vibrated. The experience shook me in more ways than one, for I heard the organist remark in her way out that there was something odd and muffled about the tone of the instrument. I lay quite still for an hour or more afterward, but nothing came of it. My ears stopped ringing and all seemed quiet. Finally and cautiously, I climbed down, feeling my way in utter darkness. First, however, I stripped off my rags, leaving them atop the organ. Underneath them, having planned as thoroughly as possible, I wore a simple muslin frock. The bundle of orphanage clothes I carried with me as I shuffled and groped towards the altar in order to light some candles. I must admit that even though I am a free thinker and a rationalist, I felt quite queer helping myself to the holy tapers in this fashion. And, after I had provided light, I felt even more discomfited as I washed myself with the water in the baptismal font. There is something intimidating about a shadowy chapel at night, and once I had tidied my hair into a simple bun and removed every possible vestige of waif for my appearance, I felt quite eager to go elsewhere. Specifically, I wanted to find the attic room that was being got ready for the Baron. I reasoned that Lady Cecily Alastair would be brought to this orphanage quietly, by boat, perhaps before dawn, for the unfortunate girl was to be married to the toad-like Bramwell Merganser under duress, and therefore in secrecy. Usually a bride-to-be of the upper classes would be coached to the church in her wedding gown. Perhaps they might dress up the stable-boy, but no, any show of wedding finery would surely excite comment and inquiry. Baron and Baroness Merganser needed to complete their unsavory deed and have it fait accompli before any boasting could ensue. Yet I could not conceive of such a proud pair foregoing all of the usual marital pomp. You will need a trousseau, and a trousseau you shall have. Poor Cecily. Surely Aquila and Otelia would force her to dress the part of a blushing bride. Premise. They will require her to wear a wedding gown. Premise. Circumspection requires that they will not bring her to the orphanage actually wearing the gown. Conclusion. They will put the gown on her in situ. Hence the attic room. For what other purpose could it be needed? Presumably all other chambers in the place were occupied by waifs, or strays, whichever, and a bride requires a certain privacy. Especially when it is not her idea to be a bride. Tomorrow morning, when Cecily Alastair was brought in to be all dressed in white, I quite wanted to be there, hidden and waiting. Slipping out of the chapel door, I found hallways dimly lit by gas turned to its lowest flame, and in the near distance I heard the creaking tread of a matron, then her murmur as she accosted a wayward child. "What are you doing out of bed?" Oh dear. It seems that an orphanage never truly slept. How fortunate that, outwitting her brother Mycroft last summer, outwitting brother Mycroft last summer, I had become quite adept at walking silently upon stockinged feet. As quickly and silently as I could, I crept away from the matron, located a stairway, ascended it to the first story, then the second, then Eureka! In darkness I climbed a final narrow stairway to what must be the attic door. Locked, of course, but only with a simple old-fashioned latch, the sort I knew how to pick. I did so, opened the door, stepped inside, closed the door silently behind me, then, with a sense of triumph, I lit a candle I had brought with me from the chapel. Raising it, I saw steamer trunks, an empty birdcage, broken rocking horses, and the like, with dust enshrouding everything. For a horrible sinking moment, I could not understand what dreadful mistake I had made. This was not the first time my reasoning had been wrong. Wrong. I was after only a stupid girl, unfit to— Nonsense, Enola, think. I thought and realized that such a large building would have more than one attic. I must try again. That was all. And so I did, and eventually succeeded. I will spare the gentle reader any account of the ensuing several hours and near encounters, except to say that finally, just at dawn and with huge relief, I found myself in what was obviously the right place. An attic room, cleaned, scrubbed, shined, with a dressing table, a standing mirror, and some chairs, and with quite an imposing ghostly white presence hanging from a rafter to puddle on the floor. White on white, draped in a sheet to keep it clean, this looming spectre was the wedding gown, a titanic one, its crystal-beaded lace train trailing a good 9 feet. Close by hung a similarly beaded, elaborate headpiece with yards of cloudy white veil. and near at hand stood the most peculiar pair of white shoes. Slippers, rather, their fine leather uppers daintily shaped, but with soles like clogs, gentlewomen sometimes wore to elevate themselves above the muck of the street, yet even taller. Soles that would put the wearer at least 10 inches above the ground. Wearing those shoes would be like trying to walk on stilts. It took me a moment to comprehend. How wickedly clever! A way to hobble the bride without letting it show, and at the same time make her look older, taller, and more splendid in the expensive gown. Poor little Lady Cecily, who wanted only to read, draw, think, and do some good in the world, to spend her life at the dubious mercy of Viscountess Ottilia and Baroness Aquila. Harpies, I muttered. Vipers. They must be defeated. My unlucky lady must be saved. But first I must find a place to hide until it was time. And this necessity, which I had considered would be the least of my worries, turned out to be the most troublesome. I blew out my candle, and, after it was cool, secreted it in my pocket. That would be my long and lanky personage. Or would that my long and lanky personage could so easily be concealed? By the dawn light streaming in through dormer windows, I looked high and low, but there was simply no cover to be found in that bare attic. No sofa behind which to crawl, no wardrobe or other bulky furniture, no concealing draperies, not even a cloth skirt upon the table. And as I stood there, in plain sight, I heard footsteps ascending the attic stairs. Ye gods, now what? Only one possibility presented itself, which I acknowledged with the greatest reluctance, for it caused in me a revulsion of feeling even worse than that which had afflicted me whilst appropriating altar candles and baptismal water. Why so I cannot say, for I love beautiful clothing, and the gown was exquisite, princess-seeming, puffed sleeves, gleaming silk overlaid with dainty lace, as I saw when I forced myself to lift the sheet and look. Yet the sight of all that white appalled me. I hesitated until I heard someone actually at the door before I took a deep breath, steeled myself, as if entering the sea from a bathing machine, and dived under the heavily beaded hem to stand up within the hanging gown. Dangling my bundle within the fullness of its gored skirt, I placed my feet so that its train would hide them. As I then stood quite still, it settled around me naturally enough. Or so I hoped. I heard multiple footsteps. Several persons were entering the room. I heard a leaden sort of thump or thud, and then a matriarchal voice said icily, "Very well, Jenkins, I think she is unlikely to cause any mischief here. You may remove the restraint from her mouth." The Harridans. Harridans? The Harridans, the hags, no appellation seemed forceful enough. The Veragos had gagged her? Wanting a look at Lady Cecily, some indication of how she was bearing up, I peeped through the placket near the wedding gown's waist, but without much success. In a fragmentary manner I saw a lopsided derriere much draped in a mauve and cream. That would be Viscountess Ottilia, just as elaborately clad in a dove-grey silk, not an inch of which went unadorned, another figure quite similar to the first, the charming Aquila. A simple flowered skirt with tails of white lace, apron ties hanging down, a chambermaid in her morning dress. All three of them turned towards the fourth person, who had apparently flung herself into a chair on the other side of the room, as far as possible from the gown in which I hid. Of this individual I could see only a bit of citrine, the same awful bell skirt they had put on Cecily when I had first seen her in the ladies' lavatory. I felt a pang of both pity and triumph. My little left-handed lady had more spirit than Sherlock Holmes would have credited. Obviously, she had not ceased resisting. It was Aquila, ruffled, pleated, poofed, flounced, fringed, beaded, beribboned, bedecked beyond description, who had spoken, and now continued, "Do the best you can with her, Jenkins. We must see to the altar of flowers. You," to the lump of citrine rebellion in the chair, "put a better face on, or there will be hobbles for you as well as the shoes, and no dinner afterward. You will watch the rest of us enjoy your wedding feast. Come, Ottilia, we will return shortly." She said this over her shoulder to Jenkins as the two of them rustled silkily out the door. As soon as they moved, I could at last see Cecily fully. With her head down, she slumped in her chair like a comma, despair written in every line of her personage. Although she looked much thinner than when I had last seen her, they could not, after all, starve her entirely lest she die. She still seemed, in some less tangible way, diminished. Her face more frail and elfin, her eyes more shadowed. Seeing her thus, I bit my lip in consternation. For what if she no longer had the necessary strength? "Now, Miss Cecily," coaxed the maid, Jenkins, "sometimes a body's got to just make the best of what what'll be better when it's over? Now just think how pretty you're going to look, all done up in orange blossoms and myrtle, with the sweetest wee grosgrain ribbons. Did you see the dear, dear ribbons Lady Aquila got for your bouquet?" Crossing the room, the maid picked up a large bandbox someone had left on the floor inside the door, placed it on a chair, lifted its lid, and bent over to search its contents. Her attention fully diverted. My chance. From one of my pockets I drew a certain peculiar pink fan. Then from inside the wedding gown I opened the placket and poked my head out, holding the fan to my chin as a signal so that Lady Cecily would be sure to recognize me and understand what I was about. If only she looked up. She did. My movements caused her to lift her head and stare at me. I felt once again that sense of electric shock when our gazes met and locked. Shock, especially keen, I am sure, on her part. Under the circumstances, her great dark eyes widened enormously. Pointing to the oblivious servant, I silently mouthed the words, "Send her away." How Cecily was to do this when the servant was under strict orders to stay with her, I had no idea. But as it turned out, she accomplished the task with marvelous efficiency. Even as I drew my head back into the snowy concealment of the gown, she simply slid from her chair with a thump to sprawl on the floor in what appeared to be a faint. "Miss Cecily?" I heard the maid inquire, and then, punctuated by sounds of movement, a series of panicky cries. "Miss Cecily! Miss Cecily, wake up! Oh, my goodness! Smelling salts! A doctor! Help!" Then good Jenkins fled the room. The instant I heard her exit, I darted out, rather like a partridge breaking cover. I burst from under the wedding gown and across the room to close the door and turn the key in the lock, even as the maid's frantic feet thumped down the attic stairs. "There," I whispered, feeling quite a triumphant grin on my face as I turned to Cecily. She still lay motionless on the floor. Heavens, it wasn't just a clever ploy. She had truly fainted. What if I could not revive her? That's the end of chapter 16. Yep, title check. The Peculiar Pink Fan. I do live editing all the time, a sign of a true professional. Yep. It is the best way to get immaculately clean, I suppose. Terror. Yeah, exactly. Well, they're 10-inch high shoes. Alrighty. Thank you for clapping. Just gonna keep on keeping on. Chapter the 17th. But as I knelt beside her, Cecily gave a little sigh, blinked, opened her eyes, and as her gaze fixed on my face, joyous amazement dawned. With greatest wonder she whispered, "Enola?" How strangely it affected me to hear her say my true name in that way. Gripped by emotion, I could neither move nor speak. "Enola?" Her hands faltered towards me. "You again? Can it be?" "Shh." Her touch made me want to weep, but I quite needed to function. Forcing myself to action, I fumbled in my pockets for the strengthening candies I always carried with me, unwrapping one and giving it to her. She placed it in her mouth, and galvanized, I think, more by my presence than by sugar, sat up, to find me pulling off her shoes. "We are going to disguise you," I told her softly, but with clear emphasis, "so that you can escape. Agreed?" "Agreed? By all means, my mysterious friend." Springing to her feet, Cecily began to claw at her diabolical skirt to get it off. The confounded thing fastened in back, of course, as did her blouse. One of the requisites of upper-class clothing is that one should not be able to dress oneself without the assistance of a servant. After I had torn open her buttons, she sloughed off her outer garments, letting them puddle on the floor, as I ran for the bundle I had left beneath the bridal gown. The bundle of garments, including a coarse leather pair of boots that had been offered to Peggy the afternoon before. "We were going to make an orphan of you." Indeed, I might as well be one. Still, Cecily's thin face lit up when she saw the things. She did not look nearly so much like Alice in Wonderland when she was glad, and she snatched at them. As I, also, was in a tremendous hurry to undo the bundle and get the garments onto her, it became exceedingly difficult to accomplish simple tasks. Cecily and I kept getting in each other's way. Moreover, I had things to tell her. "You remember Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Joyously she responded, "Your brother." Heavens! She took my breath away. "I hope you have not told anyone." "Of course not. Did you tell anyone about my charcoal drawings?" The question was rhetorical. She knew I had not. Trying to hide my smile, I hurried on. "Your mother has retained Mr. Holmes on your behalf. She has gone to stay with her family in the country. He will take you to her. Confound these stockings!" It seemed to be taking an eternity for us to dress her in the brown smock and brown gingham pinafore, thick zebra-striped stockings, and sensible, ugly boots. But in actuality it must have been only a very few minutes, for no one had yet returned as I tried to tuck her hair under her white ruffled cap. Long, glossy, thick, slithery hair, it kept getting away from me. "This will not do," I whispered, growing a bit wrought, aware of moments ticking by. "How are you going to pass as an orphan with such accursedly lovely hair? Just cut it off! We haven't the time!" Yet I grabbed scissors out of the bandbox, small things meant for snipping ribbon, they would have to do, and started hacking off her shiny locks at the level of her ears. No sooner had I begun than we heard footsteps pounding towards us up the attic stairs. Cecily startled like a deer. "Hold still!" Rigid, she did so, but started to say, "Enola, thank you for—" "Shh! Make no sound," I whispered, frantically cutting off long tresses of hair and stowing them in my pockets for lack of any other place to hide them. Someone, probably Jenkins, tried the doorknob, then cried, "It's locked!" Yet, as is the case with most people, she continued to agitate the knob as if somehow she could thus release the bolt. "Get out of my way," commanded either the Baroness or the Viscountess. They both sounded the same. "You nitwit, she tricked you!" A series of thumps ensued as if someone had actually pushed the unfortunate Jenkins down the stairs. At the same time a fierce voice exhorted, "Cecily!" That shout made the girl flinch. I felt her jump. "Shh," I whispered, still snipping my way from one ear around the back of her neck to the other. "Pull your front hair down over your face." As she did so, the knob rattled anew. "Cecily, open this door and let us in," shrieked one of the sisters. "Open up at once," screeched the other. They continued thus in counterpoint. "Cecily, ungrateful brat, open this door or I will punish you severely," etc. After a brief time, however, the tenor of their tune changed. "There must be another key," one of them declared. "Jenkins, go find it." Oh dear. But I was nearly ready. "There," I whispered, scissoring a thick swath across Cecily's forehead. "Finished." Once more I popped the cap on her head, and a dear little orphan she made indeed, standing a foot shorter than I, in overlarge shoes and clothing too big for her, as if she were expected to grow into it. Her shorn hair, especially the thatch hiding her forehead, made her nearly unrecognizable as Cecily Alistair. Splendid! She could not answer my smile. Her huge eyes remained terrified as they fixed on me for salvation. But Enola, now what? How indeed? To effect her escape with the enemy's voices clamoring directly outside the attic? "Bring men to knock the door down," shrilled an aunt. "And be quick," screeched the other. Yes, my lady, Jenkins' voice faded below. Cecily bit her lip as if to keep from sobbing. "Trust me," I told her, scooting over to where the wedding gown hung. Ripping off its sheet as I snatched it down off its hanger, I plopped it onto myself. I would not have thought it possible for Cecily's eyes to stretch any farther, but widen yet more they did, and her rosebud mouth formed an O. "To give you time," I whispered. "Here." Burrowing under the gown to the pocket of my muslin dress, I found the pink paper fan on which I had penciled as a contingency lest all else fail. I instructed Lady Cecily. "Hide behind the door. When they have all come in, slip out. Go to the gate. Show this." I handed her the fan, "and Mr. Holmes, or one of his friends, should be waiting for you." Meanwhile, footsteps pounded up the attic stairs. "Here's an extra key, my lady," cried a shaky voice outside. There was no time to fasten the myriad pearl buttons running up the wedding gown's back. I had just a moment to seize the headdress and plop it onto place myself, covering my face with layers of cloudy veil as I threw myself onto the chair in which Cecily had been sitting. The key snicked in the lock. So long as I slouched in the chair, mostly buried in the mounds of wedding gown, they would not see how tall I was. Their suspicions would not be aroused, so I hoped, as I hid my stocking feet under the yards of white skirt, and my hands in my lap, pinning folds of veil between my fingers. "Cecily!" stormed two harridan voices in unison as the door slammed open, then similarly in chorus, but quite changed in tone. "Cecily?" Through the milky thickness of veil I could not make out their expressions. The two dowagers and the cowed servant, as they walked in and formed a semicircle staring down at me. "She's put her gown on," one of them said in wondering tones. I could only dimly see them, and behind them the little orphan girl tiptoeing out of the room to slip down the stairs. In order to keep attention firmly upon myself while Cecily made her escape, I began to rock my upper body to and fro in an interestingly demented manner. "Cecily, stop it. Why have you put your dress on by yourself? You've got it all crooked. Stand up." Instead, I feigned a sort of spasm. "Stop that grotesque twitching, Cecily. What's the matter with you? Let me see you." One of them tried to lift my veil. She could not, of course, for as I was holding it down. I tried to assess how far the real Cecily might have got by now. Downstairs, surely, and possibly out the door, crossing the yard. "Cecily, let go of that veil." One of the sisters tried to wrest it from me. "Don't, Ottilia, you'll tear it, and that's the finest tool in London." "You make her let go, then." "Cecily!" Aquila grabbed me bruisingly by both upper arms. "Do as she says." Instead, I began to thrash in a truly pitiful manner. "Cecily!" Both of them grasped me by the shoulders, shaking me to my satisfaction. Let them maul me all they liked. The only difficulty was to remain stubbornly silent while they abused me, so as not to let my voice give me away. The longer they belabored me, the better, giving the real Cecily time to escape. But they were interrupted. "What's the matter with her?" roared a male voice, unmistakably that of the Baron. Both Baroness and Viscountess squeaked in well-bred shock at such a masculine invasion, turning on him. "Dagobert! Bramwell!" squawked, presumably, Aquila. "What are you both doing here?" What are you doing here? Heaven help me, both of them? Yes, through my veil I could make out two looming forms in fancy dress. "Jenkins said we needed to break down the door," replied the Baron. "Is Cecily misbehaving?" "I think she's gone quite mad." It was quite simple for me, in my terror of the Baron, to act the part of a lunatic, recommencing to rock to and fro in my chair, but this time allowing myself a number of pathetic moans. The Baroness continued. "First she fainted, or pretended to, and then she locked us out, and now she's gone and rucked her gown all over herself. Just look at her. Nodding like a—" Abruptly the Baroness of Merganser stopped, and when she spoke on, it was in the tone of one who has taken command in a crisis. "Jenkins, fetch the vicar up here." "Yes, my lady," I heard the hapless servant scamper away. "Bramwell, come stand beside your bride." "What are you talking about, mother?" whined that toad-like individual. "Do as I say. Don't you see the state she's in? And she'll only get worse. Do you think we want to carry her down to the chapel? No. Ceremony can go hang. We must get you married to her here and now." That's the end of chapter 17. It was definitely the sugar. I feel you too. Just seal it by sniffing this cake. Cake sniffing orphans. Seal the deal. I know it's going to be a lovely marriage. It's going to be so great. I just don't know what's going to happen when they find out it's not Cecily. Probably going to go bananas. Alright, we're finishing up, guys. Chapter the 18th. "Jolly good idea! Ha ha!" roared the Baron, and in that awful moment I understood my instinctive reluctance to secret myself within bridal white. It had to do with the lock part of the word. Wedlock. Trapped. Horribly, irrevocably trapped. Nonsense, Enola, you will do quite well on your own. Think. Although terribly frightened by the unexpected turn of events, I reasoned that I was no worse off than before. At one point or another I must take very hasty leave, that was all. And as we all waited for the vicar to arrive, even as I squirmed and swayed, whimpered and groaned, doing my best to seem demented, perversely my thoughts and sentiments calmed so much that despite my awkward situation, I found myself pleasantly contemplating the possibility of a most unforgettable scene. Like my brother Sherlock, I dearly loved a moment of drama, now and then. I would play my lunatic part, I decided, until the very moment when they would try to make me say I do, at which point I would quite lucidly declare, "I most definitely do not," and then, as they all stood in shock and astonishment, that I should so forcefully reject the charming Bramwell. Then, with my great dignity and decision, I would arise from my chair, rip off my disguise, and stalk out. Or, more realistically, run like the devil. Without any shoes? Oh well, one must be brave. Do or die, certainly Cecily had got away by now, making my predicament worthwhile. Such were my musings as I rocked, twitched, grunted, and occasionally panted for better effect. The wedding gown had the currently fashionable bead-encrusted steel-stiff high collar, and this dog collar, all too appropriate for those so-called nuptials, rasped against my earlobes most annoyingly, causing me to hiss with pain as well as swaying, shuddering, etc. I have that tormenting collar partly to thank for the convincing quality of my performance. "Most irregular," the vicar was murmuring as Jenkins brought him in. "You see how she is?" Aquila demanded. "Well, yes, I do. I appreciate also how well you will be rewarded. Ha ha, and get on with it," bellowed an unmistakable voice. Someone, probably Jenkins, thrust a fragrant bouquet into my lap and stuck some flowers into my bobbing head whilst the others milled around, pushing aside a few chairs, taking their places, and asking one another who had the rings. As if herding cattle, Aquila lashed with her tongue, and in a surprisingly brief time the vicar did, indeed, get on with it. "Dearly beloved," he intoned, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Holy my eye! While continuing to bob, spasm, and so on, I paid close attention to the vicar's drone, waiting for my cue. "If anyone here present doth know any just reason why this man should not be joined with this woman in marriage, let him speak now." All quite routine, no one ever said anything. "Or forever hold his peace." "I can think of several reasons," spake a pompous male voice from the doorway. My resultant squeak went unnoticed in the generalized gasp of shock as all turned to the intruder. The Baron demanded, "Who are you?" But I already knew who it was. The worst of all possible uninvited guests. He whom I feared above all others. The person in all the world who had the most power to ruin my life. The way he had just ruined my surprise. Truly it is amazing what disappointed vanity will do. Instantaneously, supreme spleen replaced my feelings of terror. Outraged. "Mycroft!" I shouted as I shot to my feet and snatched the veil off my head. "Curse you! Why can't you let me—" "First, although not foremost, that bride is not who she is purported to be," Mycroft spoke on in the same pontificating tone, unblinking, while screams and exclamations burst from all others. "Let me alone!" In a frenzy of wrath, I ran at him, and, with both hands upraised as if hurling a boulder, I threw my bridal veil onto his head. Alas that I could not pause to admire the effect as I crowned him from top hat to waistcoat in white lace and tulle. I am sure his appearance was most startling, but in the act I had regained just enough sense to run on past him. As my arms came down, so did the bridal gown, falling off me to puddle on the floor. I hoped Mycroft would trip over it after battling his way out of the veil. I hoped he would fall and injure some portion of his stout personage. I hoped the belligerent Baron would punch him in the nose. Sherlock must have told my other confounded brother where he might find me. I hated him. Both of them. I had no idea why I sobbed as I ran down the attic stairs. Shouts rose above and behind me. "After her! Stop that wretched girl! Enola, wait!" Mycroft's commanding voice. Muttering something unrepeatable in reply, I plunged down more stairs, and in my stocking feet I slipped and nearly fell, grabbing at the banister to save myself, which gave me the blessed thought to slide down that sturdy polished wooden rail the rest of the way. I did so, flying through the second story. I retain a blurred memory of astonished, delighted faces as I whizzed past a group of orphans, and the first story to the ground floor. The sounds of footsteps thumping in pursuit faded behind me, and the denizens of the orphanage proper remained upstairs. No one got in my way as I ran through a hallway. Some mantles and bonnets hung on pegs. I grabbed one of each and out the front door. Slowing to a brisk walk, I crossed the yard. I whisked tears from my cheeks, slung the mantle, a simple navy blue affair, over my shoulders, and hid my disheveled hair under an equally simple, old-fashioned dark blue bonnet, probably some matron's Sunday headgear. Meanwhile, seated in his sheltering box inside the gate, an exceedingly ancient and withered man dozed, his chin propped upon the chest of his brown poplin tunic. Only as I strode quite close to him did he awaken with a start and study me with bleary eyes, his fogged old brain wondering who I was and where I had come from. As his mouth fumbled open to speak, I told him in my most crisp, aristocratic tones, as if I might be a member of the orphanage board, or perhaps one of the trustees. "Towheedle, you've been napping again. Shame on you. Open the gate." Poor man, he jumped to do so. Next I demanded, "Did a tall gentleman with a limp come this way?" He nodded, bobbed, pulled at his forelock. "Yes, he didn't know whether to call me ma'am or m'lady. "And did the girl go with him?" "The little one with the pink fan? Yes'm." "Thank you, Towheedle. That will be all." It really was. All. All right. All right for Cecily Alistair. Her hair would grow back, and she likewise would grow, coming to terms with herself, finding her place in the world, but first and foremost she would rejoin her loving mother. Ah, to have such a mother. Sailing out of the orphanage, I no longer cared whether the vulnerable gatekeeper noticed that I wore no shoes. It no longer mattered. Within moments I hailed a cab, which took me to the Underground, which took me to the East End, where I limped to my lodgings, intending to lie down for a well-earned rest, or, more truthfully, for indulgence in nervous prostration. As I let myself in at the front door, however, I encountered Mrs. Tupper, who took one look at me and let out a bleat like a sheep. "Miss Michelle, what happened to you?" Her question was largely rhetorical, as her deafness, thank goodness, prevented my making any detailed answer. Nevertheless, the dear woman would not take my upraised, dismissive hands for an answer, and hustled me to hustled me to a seat by the hearth, where she provided me with a basin of warm water in which to soak my insulted feet, a bowl of nourishing as if noxious liver and barley soup. A bowl of nourishing if noxious liver and barley soup. I think that's supposed to be of. I think it's a typo. Liver and barley soup, and a great deal of sympathetic monologue. The dear alone knows how you got yourself in these situations, but it's none of my business. Just let me comb out your poor hair now. You'll be needing big balm and some cotton lint for them ruined feet. I'll warrant you went and give your shoes to some poor wretch. Ought to have more care of yourself, but there ain't a gooder heart in London. How you get yourself all scraped and banged up, and your poor smock torn this way is beyond me. Eat your soup now, and there's some bread pudding, poor lamb. You're half starved. What am I to do with you? But she knew quite well what to do, actually, and by the time I finally thanked her from the warmth of my bed, watched her close my chamber door behind her, and heard her creaking footsteps and plaintive voice going down the stairs, I was warmly fed, bathed and clothed, with my sore feet attended to, and my sore heart beginning to feel better as well. I had felt quite betrayed, you see, because Sherlock had told Mycroft my whereabouts, but my reaction was childish, I realized, as I lay trying to compose myself for slumber. Sherlock was only doing his duty as he perceived it, and he had never promised me anything else. In our familiar game of hide-and-seek, my brother played fair. Brothers. Mycroft, too, had done nothing, however annoying that might not reasonably be expected of him. It was not his fault that he was who he was, any more than it was Mum's fault. Oh, Mum. While Mrs. Tupper had mothered me today, where was my real mother? My riddling inquiry. Narcissus bloomed in water, for he had none. Chrysanthemum in glass, for she had one. All of ivy's tendrils failed to find. What was the iris planted behind? Had not yet received any answer. But of course it was too soon to expect one. Perhaps in today's Pall Mall Gazette. Closing my eyes, I told myself that I would have a look at it after I napped. But even when I received my answer, what would the good of it be? Never in her life that I could recall had Mum washed or bandaged or fed me or combed my hair. My eyes opened, staring at the blank ceiling, and errant tears trickled down my temples. Very well. I was not going to be able to sleep. Sighing as I wiped the tears away, I got up, found myself a sheaf of foolscap paper and a lap desk, and began to draw. I drew an orphan, for I felt like one. Then I drew Lady Cecily, all got up as an orphan, for she, a girl lacking a father's love, must feel much as I did. Detailing her sensitive face and brilliant eyes, I thought in how many ways I felt myself a soulmate to her, and how I had never expected to see her again. Yet it had now happened. Therefore I might hope that, perhaps in a few years, when we were grown, we might see each other more often, and perhaps go sketching together. Meanwhile, Sherlock would make sure she found her way safely to her mother's care. Feeling an odd hiatus in myself as I thought of my brother, I drew a quick caricature of his tall form, and felt my hollow heart fill and warm. Mycroft's turn. I made quite a brisk study of representing him with a wedding veil draping him to his swollen waistcoat. It made me smile. Hoping for another reason to smile, next I drew a picture of quite a lovely young lady with a gloriously coiffed chestnut hair in which nestled the most dainty and fetching of hats. Myself, in a blue promenade gown and quite an expensive wig, with my face disguised by powders and paints and primping plus a parasol. Beautiful, by George, but hardly the whole story. I drew myself as a midden-picker, then as Ivy Michelle in her cheap frou-frou and false curls, then as a street stray in a smashed bowler hat, a paragon among ragamuffins. But this could go on and on. I ought to draw a portrait of Mum. Taking a fresh sheet of foolscap, I tried, but found I could not. I could not at that moment bring her features to mind. Instead, within my tentative outline of a feminine head, I filled in other features. Steady eyes, young yet wise, straight nose, strong chin, quirky mouth, Mona Lisa smile. An angular face, not unlike that of my brother Sherlock, yet quintessentially my own? I gawked. Was it really me? Enola? Never before had I been able to draw myself truly. Why could I do it now? Because my own pencil gaze demanded truth of me. Because, I admitted, if only to myself, because I knew why the Mona Lisa smiled so oddly. Doubtless she had a mother somewhat like mine. I knew that I would not search for Mum. Not yet, if ever. Not until, or unless, I felt she wanted to see me. But whether I ever saw her again or not, I was still Enola. And that's the end. We'll read the epilogue. May, 1889. Ivy Michelle, after a few days back at work for Dr. Ragaston, takes pleasure in penning the following letter to Dr. Ragaston's client, the General. Dear Honorable Sir, regarding the matter of your missing war memento, to wit, one leg bone inscribed by the amputating surgeon, Dr. Ragaston is pleased to inform you that he has recovered it from the possession of one Paddy Murphy, cab driver, who admits to having acquired it by means of your third upstairs housemaid, for whom he professed an amorous interest, his scheme being to exhibit it among his low-minded companions for paltry financial gain. If you wish to prosecute the aforementioned Paddy Murphy, a constable may be sent to apprehend him in the Serpentine Mews. Meanwhile, your leg remains in Dr. Ragaston's safe keeping, and you may send for it at your convenience, kindly remitting payment as previously agreed. Dr. Ragaston is delighted to have been able to offer you his trifling assistance, and remain, sincerely yours, Leslie T. Ragaston, Ph.D., as dictated to Miss Ivy Michelle. My dear Mycroft, the great detective Sherlock Holmes is frankly surprised to find his brother at the door of 221B Baker Street. Mycroft hardly ever deviates from his customary orbit between his government office, his own lodgings, and the Diogenes Club. Come in, have a cigar and a glass of sherry, no? Some urgent wind blows you this way? No, merely a vexing drop beneath the door of my comfort, grumbles Mycroft, settling his bulk in the best armchair. May I be of assistance? I doubt it, as you were chump enough to let her go. Ah, Sherlock turns away to dig his long fingers into his rather eccentric pipe tobacco container, a Persian slipper. Our sister, am I never to hear the last of the ha-ha incident? Perhaps when I hear the last of the bridal veil incident. How is Cecily Alistair, by the way? Much better, in the care of her mother and her mother's family. I understand that Lady Theodora is planning a trip to Vienna for herself and her daughters, to consult with the alienists there regarding the young lady's Jekyll and Hyde moods. Ah, they think her a dual personality. Possibly. Standing on the hearthrug, Sherlock picks his favorite meerschaum pipe, spilling only a little tobacco in the process. Or, packs it. Well, certainly, an arranged marriage is no cure for that. That was a close thing for her. Not really. Puffing to suck the flame into the tobacco, Sherlock lights his pipe with a match, as there is no fire on the hearth at this time of year. Enola and I had the matter well in hand, and you had no business being there. Did I not tell you to stay away? My dear Sherlock, how many times must I tell you? I feel it is my duty to protect Enola. Do you not shudder at the thought of our sister single-handedly undertaking to trick Viscount Inglethorpe, Baron Merganser, and their formidable wives? I could not do otherwise than try to help. I doubt that Enola perceives your interference as help. Smoking seems not to soothe Sherlock. Indeed, he begins to pace, his long legs taking him across the room and back in a few rapid strides. Mycroft retorts, what she perceives is irrelevant, for who is to rescue her from herself, if not we, her brothers? I wished to help her that day at the Witherspoon orphanage, just as I do now. Now? With droll trepidation, Sherlock pauses to eye his older brother. Whatever is she up to now? Why, I wouldn't know. I have no news of her. It's just this. From a waistcoat pocket, Mycroft produces a newspaper clipping and hands it to his brother. Ah, Sherlock hands it back, feeling no need to read it, as he has seen it in the Daily Pall Mall Gazette. Narcissus bloomed in water, for she had none. Chrysanthemum in glass, for she had one. All of Ivy's tendrils failed to find. What was the iris planted behind? Mycroft peers up at him from beneath a thick hedge of eyebrows. What was concealed behind the mirror, Sherlock? Nothing except a considerable sum of money, which I have deposited in bank for her should she ever need it. Why? Mycroft answers the question with another question. Do you think she placed that advertisement because she needs money? I doubt it. She seems quite able to pay cab fare generous enough to see her out of... She seems quite able to pay cab fare generous enough to see her out of many an escapade. In regard to what was behind the mirror, I imagine she is merely curious. But why such strong curiosity? Why not? Curiosity goes hand in hand with intellect, and intellect runs in the family. Intellect in a female? Bah! Nonsense, Sherlock. It is some matter of the heart that compels our sister to send our mother another flowery missive. What do you think she wants from this advertisement? Frowning, the great detective stands still to look down on his brother, but fails to answer. Indeed, Mycroft hardly gives him time to answer before he speaks on. I know what Enola hopes for, and I promise that we should give it to her. I propose that we should give it to her. I fail to follow you. Sherlock, it is simple enough. The girl is devoted to her mother, who abandoned her. Enola longs for assurance of her mother's affection. That is what she hopes you found behind the mirror, a love letter from Mummy, and that is what we could provide for her. Several seconds pass while Sherlock Holmes puffs his meerschaum and stares at his brother. Then he says, not as a question, but as a statement, "To bait a trap, you mean?" "Necessarily so. In order to get her back within the pale of civilized society, provide her with a proper education, see to her future. Desirable as those objectives may be, my dear Mycroft, I think trick is hardly the way to befriend Enola. I will not lie to her." "Sherlock! You are saying you will not help me?" A surge of surprised anger lifts Mycroft to his feet at the same time as Sherlock calmly takes a seat. "That is correct." Sherlock Holmes reaches over to his desk and picks up a slip of foolscap, folding it repeatedly. "Moreover, I have anticipated you. In tomorrow's editions you will see a communication from me. Here is the copy I have kept." He tosses the now wadded paper across the room to his brother, who succeeds in catching it. Mycroft opens it and reads, "E.H. Iris was monetary. Now placed in Shropshire Royal Bank. Your name. Regret can give no further satisfaction. Our mutual friend C.A. thanks you profusely for your gallant assistance, as do I. With utmost regard, S.H." Mycroft Holmes studies this for some time before he looks up expressionless. "Well," he says coldly, "so that's the way it's going to be." Quite gently, "That's the way it's going to be," says Sherlock. The end. Well, that's the end of the book, ladies and gents. Thank you for sticking along. I'm going to read some of your messages. Yep. Terror, that's awful. Jekyll, Jekyll, hide, Jekyll, hide, hide, Jekyll. I remember that so well. That's the way it's going to be. Thank you for your applause. I'll go ahead and give you a preface of the next book. Alright. Make sure this is actually the next book before I get confused. Yep, so book 5 will be our next book. Sorry, I hate that glare on the... See, oh, you can see yourself. The Case of the Cryptic Crinoline will be book 5. I'm going to have to double check on the pronunciation of that because I'm sure it will be mentioned multiple times. But this book is from... I'm trying to see what library this is from. Merrick Library. M-E-R-R-I-C-K. But it doesn't say what state that is in. Sad. So wherever Merrick is, this book is brought to you by Merrick Library. And I'll read you the little inside jacket. Yeah, it doesn't say. This has been discarded by Merrick Library right there. For Enola, longing for her absent mother and on the run from her older brothers, it is a fundamental fact of life that her name backwards spells alone. Her lonely London days include very few people except her landlady, Mrs. Tupper. Although nearly deaf and a truly dreadful cook, the elderly Mrs. Tupper is endearing, really the closest thing Enola has to family these days. So imagine her horror when she comes to find Mrs. Tupper kidnapped. And who would take her, and why? And what does Florence Nightingale have to do with it? Is there more to the kind, homely Mrs. Tupper than meets the eye? No matter what the risk, Enola will not rest until dear Mrs. Tupper is safe at home, and whoever took her had better watch out, because this time it's personal. From the Master of Mystery, Nancy Springer, here's another absorbing adventure for our award-winning, critically acclaimed, unstoppable young heroine. So there you have it. Maybe Merrick, New York. Hello, Tori. Welcome home. Glad you're safe. You fought all the crazy traffic. I'm going to Google it right now and see where Merrick is. I'm going to look up Merrick Library. Merrick Library. This is saying in Merrick, New York. I believe that is the case. So we'll say Merrick, New York. That's what we'll go with. And if it's not, then oh well. Oh, so sad, Tori, I'm sorry. You'll just have to start this video over. It's only like 45 minutes, so it'll be okay. Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for watching and listening. I don't know when I will start this book. Hopefully it'll be pretty soon. I'd like to try and start it this week, since I have a very open schedule with a lot of things being canceled in my neck of the woods. So I will leave you guys with a little bit of music, and thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye!